Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome back. And nice to have you here. So, today we are going to do a quick recap of our last session before diving into our today's topic. Um, so, we talked about how Web3 is a paradigm shift. We talked about this last week. We discussed how when we are developing a product in Web3, we don't have to rely on our muscle memory that we have developed from Web2, and we have to think of things differently. Then we also talked about how understanding this new paradigm requires a social validation. And for that, we are looking at facilitating this transition through this series. And we also talked about why we are doing these talks because there's an industry convergence and there's an opportunity for blockchain developers. And at the same time, we feel like for the Web2 developers, there's a good opportunity because there's a transferable skill set. There is 80% skill set that can be transferred over with less effort. So today we are going to take a look at the 30,000 feet view of the Web3 ecosystem. Uh, we are looking at building blocks in the Web2 and Web3 space. And for the most part of this talk, we will be drawing parallels. We will be looking at how they are different. We will be looking at how Web3 is inherently different in a lot of different ways than Web2 and similar stuff. So as you are all kind of very conversant with this kind of a stack, so when you have a Web2 product, you have looked at the core components, you understand that there are going to be certain APIs which will provide data to some end application for a Web2 user. There will be an authentication system for authorizations and authentications. There will be application servers deployed somewhere using some common frameworks. They will be using load balancers for balancing the incoming, outgoing traffic. And we understand that there are third-party services for providing extra services for our end customers. We have databases to persist and store data across multiple sessions. We have cloud storage for different types of media. And then we also have content distribution networks to ensure that the content can be distributed across the globe, or at least in the areas that we are targeting. But now that we look at the blockchain ecosystem components, we realize that a lot of things are inherently different here. So there is no authentication mechanism. The authentication that is being done in the blockchain ecosystem is mostly through wallets. And we will talk about how wallets are essentially super important in the overall blockchain ecosystem because what they ensure is that the credentials, the access, the authorization, the authentication, all of that stays with the end customer, the person who owns the wallet, the person who created the wallet. And we will talk about how there are no OAuth, how there are no application servers. Instead, what you have are blockchain networks. And instead of supplying a curated view that in a lot of centralized systems we can't have, they give you the whole picture. So when you have a blockchain network, you have decentralization, you have immutability, but what you also have is visibility. And you can essentially look at how the state is currently in the overall system, and you can observe the state of the system. So for example, if you talk about Meta or Facebook, you can't observe the whole state of Facebook at any time. You have certain access to certain things. But with the blockchain, you can look at whatever is happening in that whole blockchain by searching for certain addresses. And then we also we will talk about blockchain interaction libraries. So a lot of times these are big blockchain networks. Sometimes they have terabytes of data, and it's absolutely impossible to search certain things right away. You don't really want to download the whole blockchain before you start searching about something. So that's where the blockchain interaction libraries come into play. You have certain libraries through which you can access the data on the blockchain, which is publicly available and indexed by someone. So you can just use a library and curate data based on your needs. We have decentralized storages in blockchain. Why do we have decentralized storages? But we have blockchains, we could store data on blockchain, and we absolutely do. But the problem is that storing data on blockchain is quite expensive. And a lot of times it's not feasible to put data directly on the blockchain. So what you have is a decentralized storage. And again, this is a decentralized storage. This is not a centralized storage managed by a single party. You have nodes of decentralized storage running across different geographical locations, different machines, managed by multiple different people who are incentivized in different ways to make sure that the data is persistent across multiple machines. And you don't lose data if one of those machines goes down. So you have decentralized storage. But another important thing that I want to share with you today is that you still have a node infrastructure. So think of it as your blockchain nodes running on AWS. So remember when you talked about transferable skill set, that you have an 80% transferable skill set that can go to blockchain. We were talking about stuff like DevOps. We were talking about blockchain development. And when we talk about node infrastructure, that's where the DevOps, that's where the operation related engineers come in, site reliability engineers. So the blockchain networks, all of them, actually, most of them are actually running on AWS and they are distributed across the globe. So to make sure that those networks keep running, that make sure that all the updates that are happening to the network keep happening, there are senior reliability engineers. There are engineers who have a lot of DevOps experience working with the node infrastructure and working on making sure that the networks stay up. So if there are any questions at this point, I would love to take those. Otherwise, we can, keep going forward. Awesome. So yeah, let's move forward. So we talked about wallets, we talked about blockchain networks, we talked about decentralized storage, node infrastructure, blockchain interaction libraries. But what are smart contracts? So remember when we talked about the blockchain network is not just your backend server, it's the overall computer, overall machine that everything is running on. The smart contracts that you deploy are your applications. There are your application servers, and there are your custom logic. So how are they different from the rest of the centralized world? Is that a lot of times the smart contracts are immutable. So once that code is written, once that deployed to the blockchain, nobody can modify that. Nobody can change that. So instead of putting your trust in a single person or a single entity or a single company, you are putting your trust in the code. And the code you can read, you can verify. So the smart contracts are the most important part, one of the most important parts of the blockchain ecosystem, and they ensure that you don't have to put your trust in any single entity or person. You are always putting your trust in the code. And the business logic that you have for your particular application always goes into the smart contracts. But those smart contracts don't have access to real world data. So for example, if you are creating a betting application, if you are creating an application that relies on real world data, how do you get access to that? And that's where the oracles come into play. Oracles are data sources. They provide the data on which the smart contracts or your custom business logic can work. And again, all of the systems that we are looking here, they are decentralized. So these data sources, which are oracles, they are also decentralized. So somebody could wonder why I can't just, use an API, get data from the API in my Web3 product and just use that. For example, if you are building an exchange, if you are building a wallet that allows exchanging cryptocurrencies or, exchanging different assets, and you want to rely on certain external sources to make sure that you have the right exchange rate at all times, you don't want to rely on a single source of truth. Because, for example, if you're relying on Coinbase or Binance or CoinGecko, only one of these APIs, and that API gets hacked, your whole system is compromised. So what is most important in this whole thinking is that everything here should be decentralized or the end user should have direct access to. There is no middle ground. You don't really work with things which are somewhat centralized and somewhat decentralized. Of course, there are trade-offs, and sometimes we have to deal with those trade-offs. But a lot of times we are just trying to make sure that whatever we are doing has a control with the end customer and controlled by their own wallets, or is decentralized. So no single entity controls that. And yeah, so if I just take like a step-by-step approach, so at the very beginning, you generate keys, you make sure that there are some keys to begin with to sign the transactions. And the very next step is to just broadcast those transactions to the blockchain network. And in when that happens, some data gets stored on the decentralized storages, some on the blockchains. And after that, you can deploy your smart contracts to interact with the stored data, to interact with the rest of the blockchain state, to allow certain functionality in your applications. And those smart contracts always work with the wallets and keys. So whoever is interacting with a particular smart contract has to sign transactions with their own keys. And that's how they allow authorized access to certain things in the smart contracts. And to pull data from the real world, you utilize oracles. You don't really just blindly get data from an API and use that. You always try to focus on getting data in a very decentralized manner as well. And when you have to pull certain state from the blockchain, you just don't download the whole blockchain. You use certain libraries, you write certain indexers. There are a lot of solutions out there, and you get the data using certain libraries in a standard format for your application to consume. And all of this runs on node infrastructure. So all of this is at the end of the day, some backend, some machines running on some cloud storages like AWS and Google Cloud, and you are just making calls to those systems. And here's a side-by-side comparison. So on the left, you have the core building blocks of a Web2 product, and on the right, you have a blockchain ecosystem components. And what I want to do right now is to take a short example of maybe building a social application. So for example, if you wanted to build Facebook or Instagram, what building blocks will you have in a Web2 product, and what building blocks you will have in a blockchain ecosystem? So in a Web2 product, all of these things that are listed here, I think they are known to most of us. We understand that the application will have some authentication mechanism. It will be utilizing APIs, which are provided by certain application servers, and the application will be available to me through content distribution networks. I will have cloud storage, so I can upload my photos on a cloud storage, and they get stored on AWS S3 or Google Cloud Storage. All of the posts that I create, they will probably go to a centralized database that uses maybe MySQL, Postgres, I don't know. And then there are third-party services. So if there are integrations of payment services or some third-party services, they have there. Now, if I have to build that same social application in a Web3 setting, what are the different things that I will need? I know for a fact that I can't ask people to sign in using OAuth, or I can't maintain some, JWT tokens. So what I will do instead is I will have a wallet integration. So in my front end, whether that be on mobile or web front end, I will have a wallet connection mechanism where people can choose which wallet they want to connect with. And I can't dictate that in most cases because that's a decentralized ecosystem. And once they actually sign in my system, I have to pull their data from a decentralized storage that's stored using their own keys, and only they can access that data, and nobody else can. All the transactions, all the posts that they have created, maybe they have a hash for that on the blockchain network, which means that other people can also see what's in them. Now there's a question of privacy. So you have blockchain network. If everything is public and everyone can see everything, how do you make certain things private? And that's where private blockchains come in. That's where zero knowledge proofs come in. There are a lot of other technologies which are in the play right now. But since we are talking about a very high level overview of things, we are going to skip that complexity for now. And when you have to interact with certain people, and you have to maybe, let's say, you want to give someone certain items using your social platform, you have smart contracts which provide this custom functionality that you have written for your application. And when you have to get data as a developer, for example, when you have to get the data for a certain user, you don't take the whole snapshot of the blockchain. You use these blockchain interaction libraries. You tell them which smart contracts you are interested in, and they pull the data that you require to build your logic. So yeah, any questions so far? I see that we have one question. So I have a question from one of Anas. Anas is asking, can you briefly technically explain how oracles are decentralized? Are they deployed truly on blockchains, or do they function through distributed systems? So Anas, this is a design question, and it can depend a lot on how a certain oracle is designed. My particular example is with Chainlink, and Chainlink doesn't use blockchains behind the scene. They mostly rely on distributed systems, and they have their own token through which they incentivize people running those distributed systems. And they have a separate consensus algorithm through which they verify the information submitted by each of the distributed systems. So yeah, a lot of times they are not on blockchains. They are separate distributed systems which can interact with the blockchain and provide data to blockchains. But great question. Thank you for that. And yeah, that's pretty much today's talk. If you have any questions, I would love to answer those right now. And we can stay on the slide for a bit. Okay, I think this was pretty self-explanatory. I feel like a lot of people here are well versed with Web3 concepts, which is exciting. So for the future sessions, what we are trying to, yeah, please go ahead, Agentic AI. You guys can also unmute and ask. So there's no need to always type your question. So while we wait for the questions, in the future sessions, we are looking at some more group discussions, and we are going to look at roundtables, and I'm planning to get some guest speakers invited. So the plan is that instead of doing a high-level overviews in the future, we focus on certain topics and we deep dive in those particular topics. So if you are talking about wallets, maybe we have a talk dedicated just for wallets. And we have certain people who have developed wallets themselves, some of the biggest wallets, and they maybe come in and they talk about their experience of developing wallets. Similarly, we can talk about smart contracts, DeFi applications, dApps, and I think a group discussion is what we are really looking forward to through these sessions. So yeah, Agentic AI, you have a question, please go ahead. Okay, sorry, I misread your question. So you say, is this will be applicable in agent development? So essentially, we are not focusing on developing agents through this Lightning talk series. Uh, and I just want to make it clear that for now, we are focusing solely on the Web3 ecosystem and how the technology behind the Web3 products work. Our focus is not on any of the other sides of crypto, like trading and stuff like that. Our focus is solely on the technical side of things, and we are staying away from the financial side of crypto. Yeah, okay. So your question is, will blockchain be applicable to agents? So I'm not sure if you read that, but a couple of days ago, Coinbase announced a new, I would say, protocol. It's called X402. Yeah, I think it is x402.org. And they essentially are developing a new protocol through which anyone can make payments and anyone can make a request for payment. So right now, a lot of the payments that we make, they are highly synchronous. So you have to get to a certain page, and then you have to decide whether I want to pay for that or not. And then you decide that I'm gonna pay for it, and then everything happens. With Explorer 2, what they are trying to do is to create a new protocol where you can get certain HTTP similar HTTP type requests for making payments. So when you are accessing an API, which is gated by payments, you will get like a prompt to make a payment before you proceed forward. Or if you are using a certain functionality, if an agent is accessing a certain API, if an agent is using an MCP endpoint, they will be prompted to make the payment before they proceed forward. I think this is super interesting, and we should read more about it. So yeah, with AI, I think there's a great consensus that all the payments are going to move to blockchains. And nobody's going to focus on ACH and SWIFT because they take 3 to 5 days just to make a payment, especially if that is cross-border. Okay, so I have another question. I hope I answered your question, Agentic AI. So looking at Shweb Sultan, he's asking Web3 only. So yeah, we are focusing mostly on the decentralized internet. We feel like this is the future. We do understand that AI is going to disrupt a lot of things. But at the same time, we do understand that AI is actually going to speed up the adoption of crypto because AI cannot function without crypto. So instead of focusing on a very wide picture of the overall AI, we are focusing on a tiny niche, which is Web3, and it is going to facilitate an AI adoption across the globe. Now, looking at the question from Vikas, hi Azhar, is there a distributed blockchain-based social network currently available, which we can test and get ourselves familiar with? So, Vikas, there has been a lot of distributed blockchain-based social networks in the past, and there are a lot of those now. So, if you haven't heard of those, you can search Farcaster. It's a very common one these days. There's also Warpcast. I think they are similar. I mostly used, um, and I think we will need to look into Farcast and Warpcast. In the past, there was console.xyz, but I think it's no more. It was going to be a replacement for Discord, but you can check that out. I don't know if that exists at the moment. But yeah, I think I can look up some more decentralized networks for you. There was this friend.tech. So yeah, there are a bunch of social platforms which are built on decentralized, but they haven't really got that much uh, uh, adoption, I would say. We have another question. Genetic AI, you have spent well. I need more elaboration for better understanding, please. Okay, so your question was, will blockchain will be applicable to agents? And I think the case that I'm trying to establish is that AI agents cannot make bank payments. For an AI agent, the best and easiest way is to give it a public-private key pair or a wallet and tell it to make certain transactions based on certain logic. So you don't have to constantly go in and make transactions every time you have a certain process. If you have a process, if you create certain agents, you give them a process and they are programmed to do certain things, you can leverage them to make payments. And to make those payments, it is a 99% sure thing that we are going to leverage blockchains. We are going to leverage crypto payments because that's the most easiest thing to do right now. And for that, I also shared with you this reference, which is x402.org. I think it was x402.org and not something else. I can double check. Uh, I'll stop sharing my screen now. Yeah, it is x402.org. And if you read their white paper, you will understand how they are making payments. They are creating a new standard for payments, but it is directed towards agents as much as it is directed for towards human consumers. So we will take one more question. So data science versus Web3, can you explain about these a bit? So in all honesty, I don't have a data science experience or background, so I can't really tell you about how how it correlates with Web3. I'm a Web3 guy and I've worked in this field for the 5 years. So if you have a certain question about how this thing maps on Web3, I'll be more than happy to answer that. So we have a great question from Wakash. Do wallet act as OAuth identity provider service? If you later sign in using another wallet, would it retain my profile? And this is like a very important thing. I'm so glad that you asked this question because wallets work in a very different manner than your OAuth profile or OAuth server. So think of a wallet as your SSH key. So you probably use SSH keys, right? When you deploy on AWS, when you use GitHub to make commits, you have an SSH key stored in your laptop. That SSH key is essentially your wallet in crypto. So every time you are trying to make a transaction, you need to have those SSH keys in place to make that transaction. And you can use that same SSH key across multiple machines. But if you don't migrate or maybe copy your SSH key from one machine to another, the next machine will not recognize you as the previous user. So on the back end, the thing that only stays for a user is just their public key. So if you have an SSH key, we know that on AWS we have a public key, and we are identified using our public key. How AWS knows that Azhar is deploying something, they look at the public key, they match it with the one that I'm providing, and they say, oh yeah, or maybe the private key that I provide, and they match that and say, oh yeah, they match. So they know that I'm Azhar. Same happens with crypto. So your SSH keys are essentially how you access the whole crypto world. You just have better, I would say, UX, better UI. You have applications to manage those SSH keys. And in crypto, we call them public-private key pairs. I hope this answers the question. Otherwise, we'll be more than happy to, connect with you on LinkedIn. And yeah, awesome. Thank you very much. So I would like to thank you very much. Thank you all for joining, and thank you for the great questions. As we plan the next lightning talk, we will definitely reach out to you guys and share that with you. Till then, take care and love this.